Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 213 of our regular shows. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com. I'm going to be your main host for this episode, Morgan, Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So on today's podcast, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be covering a few news topics that have happened in the last few weeks since the last podcast. And then our main topic is going to be, I suppose, covering one of those pieces of news in a kind of bigger discussion. And that is the Shadow of Kyoshi, the second Kyoshi novel preview pages. And I suppose that will more or less act as our sort of, preview discussion. Our last time we're going to be discussing the book in depth before it actually is released next month. So we'll get straight into the news here. I suppose the first piece of news to talk about is this one. The Avatar The Last Airbender, the Search Omnibus, was announced previously, but we didn't have the cover. We now have that cover. So it's similar in style to the Promise Omnibus cover in that it's a white background, so no background on it, and a selection of characters. One of the characters is in focus, four of the characters are sort of more kind of blended into the background almost. And yeah, it's a pretty cool look here. We have Zuko as our main character, surrounded by Azula, of course, Aang on a glider, and Sokka and Katara also. So Greg, what are your thoughts on this cover?
I like it. I think it works well for just keeping, the focus on the characters that are in the story with, of course, Zuko being in the forefront. I definitely like the pose, the firebending pose that they have him in. So I think that works well for what they're trying to tell in the story. So I like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the one thing that most people have been discussing with this one is the lack of Ursa on the front cover. I definitely think she probably should be there. One, because I think it would help to sell the book a little bit better, just that this book is the one about Zuko's mom, there she is. Whereas okay, Zuko and Azula being on the front are the main things that get that across here. If Azula wasn't on the front, this wouldn't really stand out as much. But the art, I think, once again is fantastic, and I in general like the sort of simplistic kind of style of it. And it means, I suppose, it's going to be pretty easy to speculate about what the future covers for the omnibuses are going to be like, in that the Rift, Toph's going to be the central character in focus, and I suppose we'll have Aang, Katara, Sokka, and, who else on the front. I doubt they'll put Lao on the front. I question if they put any of the spirit characters on the front, so I'm not really sure. Smoke and Shadow is probably the one I think people are speculating about the most, because North and South, it's probably pretty clear. Katara is going to be the central character. Sokka, Aang, Toph will probably be the other ones, but Smoke and Shadow is kind of different, because you'd think of the main cast it would be Zuko, but Zuko is the main character here, and then it's not really Aang, so is it going to be May? May as the central character? So what are your thoughts on how they'll do the other Avatar comics?
Yeah, that one is a good one to keep in mind, because there are other characters, but they're not revealed till later, and I don't know, I'm not sure, if that's a factor in designing these covers, is that they don't, even though these books are obviously already out, so it's not like you can't Google in 2 seconds to figure out what's the main reveal of these stories. But I wonder if just for the sake of how they're doing these covers, they wouldn't want to put Ursa on the front of the Search, or Azula on the other one, just because those are sort of characters that are revealed later on in this series. Because all the other standard characters can fit in the front, and I think do well. Maybe for that one they won't have all the characters sort of out of focus. Maybe they'll all be more in focus rather than sort of having one as the main focus. So maybe they'll break the mode with that one. I could still see it being on sort of a plain background, but even with this one, the Search, if Ursa was on this, I guess the composition wise of it, it wouldn't make as much sense, since at least the way that they have it currently designed, they're all in more action poses, where that's not something that we would typically see Ursa in. Usually, for like the individual ones, they have it where they'll have like a character that's faded out in the back that's just in like, a stoic pose, but not really necessarily doing anything. Versus these doesn't seem to be what they're going for. So maybe that's just a comparison point of these collection covers versus like the individual covers, or maybe even compared to the hardcover covers as well.
Mm. Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to follow them. I can maybe see them doing like Zuko, but in full, Fire Lord Zuko kind of for
Hmm.
Smoke and Shadow, and then May is like in the sort of Azula position here. But definitely we'll have to wait and see. They may end up getting to feel a little bit samey as we go on, but I do
Mm.
like the sort of consistent white background across them. It'll be interesting when they get to imbalance of like, okay, I assume it'll be Peter Wortman doing the art, but it'd also be cool to just have Team Guruhiru just be the sort of cover artist for the collected editions as we go on. But we have to wait and see. And then if they get around to doing the Korra omnibus editions, like will they switch it up? Is it still going to be white background, or will they, do something different there, like blue background or something? That's just the interesting thing to sort of speculate on. So yeah, that's the first piece of news there. The second piece of news is that Dark Horse on Twitch did their second Turf Wars live reading. This time out, they had Janet Varney, Seychelles Gabriel, PJ Byrne, David Faustino, and Mindy Sterling. So they had Korra, Asami, Bolin, Mako, and Lin. So 5 voice actors on this one. And this time they read about 40 pages. They continued on directly from the first one. So they're through like basically all of Turf Wars outside of like the last section. They got through a lot of stuff here. You had the voice actors doing a bunch of different characters, especially like PJ Byrne, David Faustino, and Mindy Sterling, because like Mako, Lin, and Bolin aren't really that much of a focus in Turf Wars. So it was cool to see like David Faustino was Won Young Koom. He was also President Raiko. PJ Byrne was Wenyan, who is President Raiko's campaign manager. That was probably like the best part of the whole stream, just that back and
Hmm.
forth. Mindy Sterling did like Janora, Kaya, and a few other characters. And I think the other thing that people liked a lot was Seychelles Gabrielle did Ping, Two-Toed Ping. That was good as well. So yeah, I thought it was another pretty fun stream. The Q&A wasn't really Avatar focused as such. Like I think the first question was maybe Avatar focused, but then it was just like typical getting into voice acting, just how they're dealing with what's going on currently and so on. It was fine. No news once again, but they sort of teased that like keep your eye out, like maybe more announcements to come type thing. In that we know there are still other books to be announced. But what were your thoughts on this second Turf Wars live reading?
I thought it was pretty good. I like that they had, you know, a larger group of people on it, which makes sense as they get farther into the book because there's, more characters that need to sort of be voiced. So I thought that was definitely really good. PJ Byrne for me was also a really cool highlight, seeing, I guess, more of the improvisational, skills that they have being used on display, I think worked pretty well for me. And yeah, I really, yeah, I think it was pretty cool to see just the whole thing laid out that way. So no, definitely a cool thing to watch.
Mm. The main thing I suppose towards the end is that they did suggest that there probably would be another one. So we'll see exactly what they do because I don't think there's enough content to just do one for the last couple of pages of Turf Wars because it would only be like 12 pages or something. So we'll see if they just do like Turf Wars, the end of Turf Wars Part 1 and then go straight into Part 2, or at least my idea would be that maybe you just focus on specific parts and this time you actually go for Runes of the Empire, in that like if they
Mm.
could get Zelda Williams in to do Kuvira, or if at all possible they could get any of the ATLA voice cast to do any of the Avatar comics. I think the one tricky thing there is that Aang's voice actor is sort of like not really involved as such, like with the fandom at all. Like he doesn't really do fandom related stuff, I think, anymore. So missing like the main character is kind of a little bit tricky. But I think a lot of the other voice actors are quite heavily involved, so it's definitely a possibility to see what exact way they do it. So, what I suppose would be your ideas for like future ones of these? Do you think they should just continue in a row and just do all of the core comics, or switch it up and do something different?
For me, I think doing the core ones seems to be the ones that work, the best for me, especially with like the voice actors who are most, involved with the series currently, or just are more, I don't know, I guess open to actually doing this sort of thing. I think that works pretty well for me, and there's plenty of, books that we have so far that they can do, and like you mentioned, if they could get Zelda Williams or just, other, actors in general, I think that could work out pretty well. I think, I don't know, it would be cool for them to do the ATLA ones. I mean, arguably that may, be bigger than doing the core ones specifically, but a lot of those, the actors and voice actors, voice actresses for that one, the age difference has changed, a long time since then as well. So even if it is, the same voice actors or people, just them growing up from back then, that has been quite a while. So even if they did get like Aang's voice actor, I would suspect it wouldn't be exactly the same as it was back then. I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like, we're dealing with like I suppose a 15, 16-year-old Aang, so his voice would probably be different anyway from what it was. So there's that to account for. But yeah, it's definitely a tricky thing of like. It seems like Janet Varney's the one organizing most of these, so they probably are going to stick to Korra for the most part. But yeah, I don't know if I quite see them like are they just basically like over the course of like a few months just give away all of Turf Wars for free like as they do just in chunks. I don't know if that's quite what they want to do, so they'll probably skip ahead and cover different ground. We'll see exactly how they do it. They don't seem to be doing them like super regularly, so I don't see it being for like another bunch of weeks until they in any way tease the next one. But they're definitely fun things. I think this time I focused more on like the amount of people actually in the chat. I think it was more like 1,200 or 1,300 like people actually watching. I think the last time everyone was looking at the sort of like total view on the channel number, and it made it seem like it was like so much more popular than it actually was, when I think it was more like about 1,000 to 2,000 people in the chat. But I don't know, did you look at that stuff too much?
Yeah, no, that seemed more of the numbers this time compared to, I guess, what you might have actually think of. And then, you can check the YouTube ones as well that they post afterwards, and those generally seem to get around the same amount of views as well, which is still pretty good. Like, it's not a small amount of people, especially when you compare it to just like normal, I guess, just sort of Twitch streamers or just streams in general. So it's still a pretty good, turnout, for sure.
Oh yeah, like you basically can't like have a conversation in the chat, like it's just going so much. Like
yeah, it's pretty active.
yeah, like it's just complete like chaos in the chat. But yeah, the last piece of news before we get into the Shadow of Kyoshi discussion is something that I suppose just basically happened yesterday, and that is that there's been a whole situation surrounding the Rise of Kyoshi audiobook release. I think we've covered 2 delays so far for the audiobook, but all of a sudden yesterday the audiobook is available. You can just get it, not from Audible, but from this website urbanaudiobooks.com. They have it available for rent or to just, buy the digital copy, as well as selling the MP3 CD and the normal CD also. And they still have this original date of the 5th of May 2020, whereas as far as we're aware right now, Audible, it's an Audible exclusive. It says only on Audible. It says July 21st, which is the like release date of the Shadow of Kyoshi. That seems to be what they're doing, but it is just available here. So I suppose, Greg, I suppose you're kind of technically the source on this information. It seems like you were the one to find this in the fandom, and that's how a few people know about this at this point. Like, how did you come across this?
Yeah, it's really just searching with just random key terms, just seeing. I was really actually just looking for updated on any sort of news, just on terms of it in general, and I just sort of came across it, and it seems like it's legit.
Yeah, so the way this works for anyone maybe wanting to do this is that if you're in America, just doing it straight from the website seems to work perfectly fine. If you're not from America, it seems like the easiest way to do it is to just download the Urban Audiobooks app and do your purchasing through there. The problem I had was that, like, even using a VPN, it seems like they have some sort of like kind of payment authorization thing that only accepts cards from America, whereas on the app, at least for me, it was done through like Apple, so the payment, like, there was no problem with it. This is probably in many ways a better way to actually do it, since you can rent it. It's like what, $6.99, $7.99 to rent it,
Yeah.
and it's to rent it for like a full month, and you can just listen to it as many times as you want in the month. There are options to like extend that if you want it for longer, rather than like buying like a full credit on Audible, or just buying it for like whatever $23 that it is in full. This is definitely a cheaper option if you just want to listen to the book, and it is the full book. Like, I'm about halfway through it. I only have about 15 tracks, so 15 chapters to go, and it definitely is the full book. It's not like abridged; it's fully unabridged. It's the full book. I can confirm that. And it's definitely, like it says, in around 14 and a half hours in total, because like some of the bigger chapters are like an hour, like the
Yeah.
iceberg and stuff like that. It's really good so far. So yeah, I suppose just some brief discussion on the actual audiobook itself. Uh, in general, like, I think it's really good. I think Nancy Wu's narration is very good. She does her best to do like different voices for the characters, and I think it definitely works. She even does kind of different voices for like some of the more minor characters, like Auntie Mui from like the early chapters and so on. There's no soundtrack stuff or sound effects like, say, the Star Wars audiobooks. It is just a standard audiobook narration, but it's perfectly fine and it's really easy to listen to. Pronunciation wise, again, apart from the stuff we had from the preview of like, oh, it's Jonju instead of Jonzu, which I think most people were saying before, and the bison being Pung Pung instead of Peng Peng, most of it is as you'd expect. Lao Ji is actually Lao Ge. That's the way that they say it in the audiobook a bunch of times. So that, I think people were speculating that that's how it is. Beyond that, I didn't notice anything weird with the pronunciations or anything. But what are your thoughts on what you've listened to so far from the audiobook?
Yeah, the pronunciations for me, work as fine as is. I think most of them, I don't even, while listening to it at least, I don't even think about, what would be, the real pronunciations of, or what I thought the real pronunciations of the names was. It wasn't until like recently I was looking up the names again, and I was like, oh yeah, I would have thought of saying it a different way. But when you're listening to the audiobook, the way that it's read by Nancy Wu, it just sort of all flows together. So it's really, like you said, it's really easy to listen to. It's really enjoyable. It flows just like a story you would expect it to. So it's definitely worth it to me to listen to it.
Yeah, and the main thing you get from this is, of course, that she does add, like, in the tone of the way she says stuff, like emotion to the scene. So when you get those big scenes, she is, doing the sort of voice acting of them as if it is a big heavy scene, and that definitely adds to it as well, in terms of like the sort of more slightly romantic scenes at the start that are like Yoon and Kyoshi, or Kyoshi and Rangi. Like, you have that tone to it. When it gets dramatic and intense, it's like that, and so on. And so yeah, as I said, I'm halfway through, so there's still a lot of big stuff to get to. But it's just a great way to sort of refresh myself on the book. I'm already fairly familiar with it, just because when I did my YouTube videos going through every single chapter, I feel like I sort of locked it in already. But there's little bits that just hearing it read out to you, you focus on a little bit more, just to sort of almost like background stuff that you just sort of glance over really quickly while reading it is suddenly more in the focus because it's being like said to you. So it's definitely a really good way to read the book. I know a lot of people have kind of been waiting for this as the proper way to do it, since reading requires like just so much just direct concentration. Like it was so enjoyable last night just being able to like play Rocket League for a few hours while just listening to this book and being like, Avatar and Rocket League. This is exactly what I needed, basically. So yeah, I think regardless of if you're waiting for Audible, if you're waiting for the CD, or you want to just go ahead and like rent it from Urban Audiobooks, I definitely think it's worth checking out. It seems like one of the go-to ways to just reread the story, basically. But yeah, so do you have any final thoughts on it?
No, I recommend it as well.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's it for most of the other news. We're still waiting, of course, on new comics to be announced. Like we sort of touched on, there's at least, I think, we're waiting for some sort of an update on what's next for the core comics. Of course, we're approaching like what, 4 months or so since Runes of the Empire came to an end. So I assume we'll eventually be getting an update on what's next for core comics, potentially if there is anything else going on with the Avatar comics, because they still haven't properly, like, I suppose, explained why we're suddenly going to like solo books with the Katara book. Beyond that, just a quick update on, I suppose, what's coming next. The Imbalanced Library Edition is coming out in like basically just under 2 weeks. So that is, I think, the 16th/17th of June is when that book is out, depending on comic book store, normal bookstore. The Promise Omnibus is, I think it's the 17th of June for comic book stores, but the 30th of June for regular bookstores. And then the 7th, I think, of July, or the 6th of July, is the Rise of Kyoshi paperback edition. And then, of course, the 21st of July is when the Shadow of Kyoshi, and it's the official release of the Rise of Kyoshi audiobook. So there is stuff happening. Not a lot of it new content until we get to the Shadow of Kyoshi, but there's stuff coming. But anyway, we'll move into the main topic here, which is the preview pages for the Shadow of Kyoshi. Now, I think we forgot to mention these completely on the last podcast, but it means we can focus on them more here. So the first way that this preview came out was that Entertainment Weekly got the exclusive from the first chapter. This was the first debut content from within the book, and it's I'm gonna say it's about like half to a third of the first chapter. We don't start at the very start of chapter 1, and it's not the full chapter 1 either, so it's just a section from chapter 1, and we've had this for a while now. Then, kind of almost out of nowhere, Amazon put up the preview for this book, and it was only up for a day or two, but it showed off most of the prologue, most of chapter 1, and then some of chapter 2 and 3, and then it also did show off a decent amount of the epilogue. So I think partly that's why the preview on Amazon was taken down and is still down, but also because they sort of left the search open, so a lot of people were just searching for specific terms within the book to find out how many times and where within the book, what page within the book they were on, to just figure out plot points about stuff, of like, searching specific terms from within the ending of the book to figure out, who survives and stuff like that and so on. And so I think they realized that this isn't great that people are figuring out everything about the book this early on. But anyway, we'll start with our just analysis of the initial EW.com short preview, which is we get some of chapter 1, which is Unfinished Business. So Greg, what were your thoughts on this kind of debut preview here for the book?
Awesome. It's really cool. I mean, it pretty much gets you right into what we know of the story, as far as just Kyoshi just sort of really getting into the throngs of just sort of dealing with the issues at hand, and this one specifically actually brings back a character that we know from the first book. So I thought that was really cool just to see how that's playing out. They don't really get any too detailed, at least in this part of the preview, to like the actual action scene, I guess you could say, but it does a really good job of setting that whole part up, so I really enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, it's definitely a, pretty nice action-packed preview. This is the way they did it with the first one. The preview for the first book was the iceberg, which was the big action scene from the opening section, and they seem to do that again here. So this is Kyoshi in the lower ring of Bossing Sei going after some you know so basically, I suppose, extreme Dao Fei. That's what she's trying to do here. In this case, it turns out to be Uncle Mock, who, of course, we met in the first book. That was the first job she did with the Flying Opera Company, was basically Mock's mission, which was ultimately to free Zhu Ping on. So that's like the whole plot of the first book, basically. So this guy is, someone who sort of needed to be taken down. The whole first book was kind of about the contrast between sort of your sort of everyday Dao Fei versus the ones who are very extreme, like the Yellownecks, and you immediately get that sense in this part of they present that like it's cool that Kyoshi's in action here, taking down the Dao Fei, but the way she's doing it, they're making the comparison that she's becoming more and more like John Zhu, like doing what needs to be done, regardless of how you do it. Now, this goes a little bit into the Amazon extended preview of this, but they show this idea of like there being like more corruption in Bossing Sei, of like she ends up even having to, I think, fight some of the kind of police force and stuff like this as well. And the things that she's doing, like she puts earth over like one of the guards' like mouths, which is exactly what John Zhu did to her in the first book, and there's just a few mentions of that even in this initial preview of just like she's using Jianzu's tactical manual for the best way to get into Mock's kind of headquarters and so on. But what are your thoughts on the way we see Kyoshi here and what she's doing?
Yeah, I mean, from what we know of her character so far and everything that's built up, it definitely seems like this is probably the most or almost the most direct way. I mean, other than the fact that she goes down through the earth into this huge, I guess, room or ballroom or cavern or whatever that's like, I don't know, they said like 14 floors down. Other than that sort of tactical strategy way, this is pretty upfront and personal as far as confronting these, extreme Dao Fei, and just, her line about, hoping that they're all there so she doesn't have to go around and looking to gather them all together. So it's definitely, on par of what we know of her character so far.
Yeah, you're definitely seeing that sort of confidence, the like extremely powerful bender that we know her as, kind of coming into play here. Of it's just leaning into it with like a line at the very end of the preview. Kyoshi drew one of her fans, two would have been too much. That's exactly the way everyone in the fandom characterizes her. Of just like you're in a fight against Kyoshi, you surrender immediately, and so on. So that's definitely good to see. And the usual world building stuff is here from FCE's writing style of like giving us the place names, in that here we are in Lung Kao City block in the lower ring of Bossing Sei. And there's just lots of, I think, really good stuff like that in these stuff. Like, I don't remember it exactly because, again, the preview's down right now. But at some point, I think either before this or after this in chapter 1, they tell you what the capital of the Northern Water Tribe's name is. And it's a pretty cool name, the way it is, and so on. But I like this. Like, there's a mention of like Lek in the first in this preview as well, which is nice in terms of now we're not just referencing Kyoshi stuff and Avatar stuff that we know, but also we can reference back to the first book. So everyone is going to wonder, how many of the Flying Opera Company are we going to get to see in this book, if at all? And of course, it's obviously building towards like when does she reunite with Rangi and so on. And I think it hits a lot of notes, and it's the same thing that happened when we got the first preview from the first book, of just like there's so much detail here in terms of like the Dao Fei now within the walls of Bossing Sei are sort of trying to be a little bit different, so they're calling themselves triads now. And Kyoshi sort of not mocks it by being like, "Why are you calling yourself a triangle now?" Because she doesn't care basically what they're doing. That's how confident she is here. That she's basically openly mocking the triad of the golden wing here and just everything that's going on. So in terms of the plot of the book, the extended preview gives us much more of a sense of what the actual plot of the book is about. Because we get like the full blurb on the back of the book. Basically, where this is going is that this is what she's doing. She's separated from everyone at this point, but she's going to receive a summons to go to the Fire Nation to deal with some political problems there. Now, this is using a little bit of what we learned from the epilogue, but it seems like the political problems we're going to be dealing with here are in relation to the capital of the Fire Nation, in comparison to some of the Fire Islands. So, the political stuff within the Fire Nation, which has been touched on before with the idea of like warlords on each Fire Island. And even I think Pele's backstory relates to that, highlighting that like it's not just a case that the Fire Nation is this whole thing under the Fire Lord, that their reach only goes so far, and that it kind of really is only the capital and the initial surrounding area of that big island that has the full control. As we saw in like the Painted Lady, a lot of the more obscure places in the Fire Nation don't have that sense of focus here. So what are your thoughts on that as being the sort of plot that we're going for here? Politics within the Fire Nation.
That sounds really interesting. I think, that's something that we're always, wanting more from Korra's time specifically, or even, currently. It's just, more stuff dealing with, the Fire Nation and how everything is sort of operating there. So the idea of, getting that in this period of time, I think is pretty interesting, as well as, of course, that I assume that means that, Rangi and that will sort of come back into play as well. So I don't know, I think this should be interesting. I mean, also just to get to see, sort of Kyoshi's, I guess, firebending, her skills at this point now. I don't know, I guess getting the whole scope of, how she's going to deal with things. I mean, is she going to be more blunt about things, or is she going to have more tact with it? Because this is more of a political thing rather than just trying to confront Dao Fei and defeat them. So this sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's immediately the conflict that they're presenting here. That's why this invitation to the Fire Nation stuff is important. That Kyoshi is Dao Fei, that she still has her loyalties to the Flying Opera Company and that sort of way, because she did the oath in the first book to become Dao Fei, and even at the end we know that she still pretty much believes in that. So she isn't going to just serve any world leaders normally. She's not going to give them the same respect that, say, Yun or Jianzhu would want them to do in terms of being that diplomatic, just because it's who she is. And it's actually a really good, I suppose, writing thing in terms of Kyoshi's always not cared about that, but now through the books we know it's that, it's because she's Dao Fei, but from a kind of better kind of point of view of like, I suppose just in general with the Earth Kingdom, it seems to just be the general thing of like up until whatever Wu is trying to do right now currently, the stuff in the Earth Kingdom has just been terrible. So you don't really have a problem with Kyoshi completely being against the Earth King and the way things are going, but they're presenting this idea of Kyoshi is going down a darker path. She's already killed Zhu Ping An, and now it seems like she's sort of very much sort of willing to do the same or stuff similar to that to get what needs to be done. Whereas when she meets up with Rangi again and Rangi sees that she's like this, that's definitely going to be a point of conflict, because as we saw from the first book, Rangi is all about sort of honor, and especially like the honor of the Avatar. And I don't think she's going to be particularly happy with the approach of Kyoshi as the Avatar here, in terms of what Rangi, who has this sort of, kind of hero worship of the Avatar, the legend of what it is going to feel about it. So how do you think their reunion is going to go, given where Kyoshi's heading?
Yeah, no, that's definitely going to be a point of contention for sure. Just with everything that it seems how Kyoshi's dealing with things. So yeah, I definitely expect there to be some issue there. I don't know, maybe this will be a point where Kyoshi, has a chance to reevaluate what she's doing so far. I don't know. I mean, I think if there is any character that could do that for her, it seems like Rangi would be the one. So no, I think it'll be, I don't know, I wonder if, Rangi or, her mother, is, somehow involved in these politics, how that would, add to any of these issues that are coming up. So there's a lot that can be explored.
hmm The other thing, I suppose I'll bring in uh, the oh my God, prologue from the book, what it said from the Amazon preview. The prologue is all about Yoon. It basically goes all the way back to what happens from where we ended off with him in the first book in terms of when he was taken by Father Glowworm. What happens immediately after that? So it kind of goes back in time, and it's before, I suppose, we see Yoon as he is in the final sections of the Rise of Kyoshi, and it kind of covers this idea of Glowworm drags him into the spirit world. So it's revealed that Yoon is actually in the spirit world, and because he's in such an emotional state, he's like affecting the world around them, and he's even sort of scaring Glowworm with how sort of powerful his emotions are changing things. And we get a I personally didn't get the full prologue, so I probably missed like the last 2 or 3 pages of it to maybe fully establish something or other. But they seem to be leaning down this idea of like Yoon hasn't changed fully just yet, and he's having a hard time adapting to being in the spirit world, but that there's definitely a sense of, he's in a lot of pain because he was just betrayed by the person he trusted the most in the world, John Zhu, and now he wants to sort of put that pain on other people. That's kind of what they say in this book, is like that's how he's feeling right now, is to sort of take the pain from within him and put it outside him into other people. And it gives you a sense where like, this is where the change within Yoon comes from. After he gets over just the fact that he isn't the Avatar, something is going to happen with Glowworm. We don't know exactly, but you are getting into that characterization. So what are your thoughts on that? The prologue being about Yoon and it kind of explaining the sort of gap in a way of Yoon and his appearances in the book?
That's good. That's definitely good to know. I hope they expand more on that throughout the whole book, because that definitely adds a whole nother element to the story that, otherwise you wouldn't really know. And I don't know, it would be interesting to see, of course, Kyoshi being so close with Yoon, how that affects her, and just, I don't know, how, I guess, her spiritual side of her training, how she deals with that specifically, since we've seen how she deals with things, that she can deal with in the physical world. That's pretty clear to us, but typically things in the spirit world take, from what we know, of a different approach. So that's definitely going to be something to look out for.
Mm. Yeah, and that obviously stems into the other thing from the end of Rise of Kyoshi. Probably the thing that people are most interested in is what is this story or whatever that Karuk is going to tell Kyoshi.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like chapter 2 or 3 from the Shadow of Kyoshi. I got like 1 or 2 preview pages where like she's flying somewhere with the monk Jinpa, who I think was at the end of the first book, who's her sort of the one who's like her monitor basically as the Avatar, who's
Mm-hmm.
her advisor basically. She's flying with him, and then she just suddenly, out of nowhere, gets a kind of vision from Karuk. Karuk is trying to talk to her, and she like falls off the bison. I don't know what happens after that, but it's this idea of, I guess for the first couple of chapters, we're not going to be filled in on what Karuk said to her at the end, or if she listened to him, and then he's gradually going to be trying to communicate with her at the start of this book. But it's still, what is that exactly about? It feels like they're going to have to incorporate whatever the Karuk thing is with whatever's going on with Yoon, because like otherwise there's so many different plot points going on here with the Fire Nation politics and everything else. Um, I think most people want this to be sort of the proper backstory of Karuk, of like, surely he's not as bad as like everything has been said about him. Like his presentation in ATLA was already like, okay, inattentive as the Avatar, but did he deserve to get Umi taken from him? And then the Rise of Kyoshi sort of like double, triple down on that by basically saying like, he was trying to break up like Heiran's marriage with like a, love poem to her and stuff like that. And Kyoshi especially did not like what she heard about Karuk. So I assume they'll have to explain the details on what exactly was the situation towards the end of Kuruk's life, and what is the situation Kyoshi will have to deal with that relates to that. But what are your thoughts on what they'll do with Avatar Kuruk in this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, like you mentioned, it definitely seems like he's, I don't know, not that he really had any really good graces per se, but it definitely seems like, popular opinion of him as an avatar is probably the worst out of all the ones that we know of, because he just didn't do that much and just sort of, unfortunately died young, so he wasn't even had the chance to do anything. So I don't know. I mean, whatever the thing that he communicates with Kyoshi, that'll be interesting to find out what that actually is and how she actually has to go about, I guess, maybe resolving that issue. And I don't know if they do give us more of his backstory. I mean, I don't know. I feel like even though it seems to be all negative, it seems like we've gotten a lot of it at this point as far as like the main key points of what he's done. I mean, other than getting like, I don't know, like a training montage of how he, learned different elements. I mean, we know about the first time he went to the Avatar state and things went crazy and stuff like that. So I don't know. It seems like I feel like we do know a good amount, but I'm sure there's still, more details that we could learn. It's just who would we? I mean, I guess if Kyoshi talks to him, spirit wise, there's more that you could find directly out from him if that's, I know, the sort of thing that would fit the story, but otherwise it would have to be from, I guess, really only one other character really that really would know, I guess, detailed information about him. And I don't know if that's something that would be, would come into the story, story wise to actually tell us that way at least.
Yeah, because they touch on aspects of like Kuruk's like younger years in the book when like Heiran and Jianzhu are talking about him, and they mention that like okay, there's the whole incident with the poem, and Kelsang had to basically be like, do not do this, and he basically had Kuruk rip it up in front of him, and then he basically quickly covers this idea that very shortly after that was when Kuruk met Umi, and they basically say that like, and that incident unfolded very quickly after that. So I guess that was right towards the end of his life. Again, I don't think we know specifically, how many years or how many months or whatever it was between Umi being taken by Ko and Kuruk's death it was, but I think it's a fairly short period of time. So is there more to that story of like, I think the biggest question surrounding that is obviously, why did Ko like take Umi? Like, how is it Ko's role to punish the Avatar for not doing anything? Prior to the Rise of Kyoshi, it had always been very weird in the sense of like, but wait, Kuruk was just an Avatar in a time of peace. Now we know that there was this rising threat of the Dao Fei growing across the Earth Kingdom. That was the threat that Kuruk had to tackle, the pirates and Dao Fei of the world, and that's what him being inactive allowed to rise up. So there's, I guess, something to punish him for, but it doesn't necessarily seem like something the spirits can punish him for. And I'm wondering, does that link into, I think when Aang meets Ko, Ko says, one of your past lives tried to kill me. And so I think everyone had always explained that as like, oh, Kuruk tried to kill Ko, trying to get Umi back. But we don't actually know that the past lives are just like active in the spirit world, and I don't think we know for sure that Kuruk ever found Ko and fought him. Otherwise, he'd maybe know about Umi's face. So are they trying to suggest that Ko had an issue with a previous Avatar, and Kuruk has suffered for that? Because we know in this book that, I think FCE confirmed, we are going to learn about the Avatar Jafar. We're going to learn his name. And I think he said something like maybe another Avatar, or that we're going to learn something more about Avatar Salai, who I think is the other new Avatar was mentioned. So there's a few kind of ways to do that, and I think that's probably the best way to tell the story, is that a previous Avatar fought with Ko and tried to kill Ko, and that's what Kuruk was punished for. I think that helps to sort of kind of smooth out some of Kuruk's arc of like, he suffered from a previous Avatar or something like that. But do you have any thoughts on how the Ko stuff is going to maybe incorporate into this?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting element. I mean, just, re-listening to the audiobook, just hearing, Father Glowworm talk about Ko as sort of like a upstart spirit and just, humans now, thinking that they can ask spirits questions and whatnot. I thought that, even remember that from the original time reading it. I don't know, it sounds like an interesting thing that of how, spirits and humans are interacting in this time and how that actually can go about just, them being, I guess, accessible in the physical realm, how that all sort of plays out. Granted, it still seems like you need to know your stuff in order to be, in contact with them. Even what we've seen in like the Avatar comics, like it's not a necessarily easy thing to do unless you're really, really sort of spiritual. So no, I think that's definitely something that I'm interested in seeing how, that plays out. I mean, I wonder if, no, the wrath of Kyoshi would even extend to, Father Glowworm in some form or fashion for, just by proxy of what happened to Yoon. So I don't know. There's a lot that could go there.
Yeah, and then there's just the idea of like, okay, I suppose that means we're going to get Kyoshi talking to at least Karuk, but surely
Hmm.
she'll want to hear from Yang Chen because the book really gets across that like Yang Chen was like the best avatar. Like she was the best at negotiating. The world had like an era of peace basically because of her and a lot of the negotiations that she had. That the only issue in her whole reign as the avatar seems to be not a less than perfect solution with General Old Iron, which is the whole Rift story. And that's not really like that bad of a thing. Just highlighting that okay, one kind of mistake, and even then it wasn't anything too crazy. Um, I think a lot. I think I'd like to hear Yang Chen talk to like an avatar where she's not so far in the past, and that I suppose Yang Chen technically is only like what 35 years ago before this as well, so relatively recent at this point in time, which I suppose is probably how we are going to learn about the other Avatar, about Jafar, because he'd be the one before Yang Chen. So I guess Kyoshi is going to talk to her previous like 3-4 lives, and that's how we find out about like a new Avatar plus what Avatar Jafar's name is, maybe. Um, when exactly that happens is kind of hard to tell, but I think that's the sort of stuff people want. That because we don't have access to the past lives with Korra going forward, use this past material to cover the past life content that we want. But yeah, I suppose how much do you think they're going to incorporate Kyoshi having access to the past lives into this?
Yeah, I mean, from what we've seen so far, it seems like the past lives are pretty involved with the current state of affairs in her story. So I don't see why they wouldn't, come up. I mean, Kirk for sure, Yang Chen for sure, and we know at least name wise, we'll learn a bit about the ones before Yang Chen. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I mean, as far as like going forward, learning from your past is important, but then, also Kyoshi just has to move forward and do things, and she does them for quite a while, as far as we know, with how long she actually lives. So, there's definitely gonna be, I would hope, just as much focus on the past as there is more on her actual story, since that is what, the book is about.
Yeah, because I don't know if this is a spoiler, but like I think it will help to put people's expectations in check. It doesn't seem like the Shadow of Kyoshi touches on basically any of Kyoshi's life beyond just these teenage years that we're dealing with right here. Um, uh, Based, I think, on the little bit of the epilogue that we have and what people have done with the searching, it doesn't seem like we skip ahead to like 200-year-old Kyoshi. We don't cover any of the Chin stuff or the incidents that we know about. Um, I'm actually kind of glad that at least I know that going in because that's something I kind of wanted these books to cover. So I think it helps that I actually know that before to keep expectations in check rather than just being disappointed right at the end. Um, I think that is probably maybe going to be a missed opportunity just because they really highlighted these books on the basis of like Kyoshi's so cool because she lives to 230 years old. Here's how she lives to 230 years old, but we're not going to see any of like why she lives
Hmm.
that long or what's going on at those times necessarily. Um, So I think that might end up being one of the few maybe kind of regretted kind of things about this book of like, maybe that could have been something that they improved upon. Because I suppose it's because there is such vague information about stuff like, say, Coco, who is Kyoshi's daughter, who it's just like one little line of like one of the Avatar extras mentions that that's a thing, and we have no other information about it really, apart from that there's a girl on Kyoshi Island like presently whose name is also Coco, and that's about it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? That the book realistically doesn't cover any of Kyoshi's life apart from her at this 16, 17, 18 years old.
I mean, that's not really too surprising, I guess, per se, because I mean that's a lot to cover. Like, I wouldn't, and we know that this is only, two part book series. It's not like, as far as we know, there's not much more of it that they're doing at all of it. So that would definitely have to be, something that would come down later along the line if they even choose to go that way. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess, at one point it's somewhat sad because those are the parts that we do know about somewhat from the actual series. But at the same time, we've seen, we know about them to begin with, which is of course why Kyoshi is cool in the first place. So it's not, I don't know. I don't feel too bad about it. I mean, I think if they did make this like a trilogy or whatever, I think it would have been cool in the third one to actually, jump through time to some of these more highlight moments, like, basically just like a highlight reel of her life with like the cool parts or the parts that are most interesting. But it is what it is, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, I think it would have been cool just to sort of reframe some of those things that we know in the context of the Kyoshi, the Rise of Kyoshi stuff of like, because Kyoshi is Dao Fei, this adds this extra dynamic to the peasant uprising in Ba Sing Se, and why she sort of treats the 46th Earth King the way she does. Here is why she doesn't really step in against Chin the Conqueror, because he's trying to become this like new ruler and no one seems to be opposing him, and she doesn't like the Earth King, so like it adds a little bit of extra kind of thing to like, oh, so she'll protect her place but not the rest because the people kind of want change, and so on. I understand like why they wouldn't maybe want to go over the formation of the Dai Li again, or maybe even the Kyoshi warriors necessarily, but I
Hmm.
think just covering stuff like her daughter would have been nice, just because it's probably going to be still questions that people have about like, you know, so does that mean Kyoshi Rangi is going to be sort of this like endgame ship or what? And how does this fit in with the whole, Kyoshi is like widely known to be like bisexual that they mention in Turf Wars, um, when there was no like other relationship as far as we're aware. So I'm just kind of worried that this may lead to immediately people wanting like a third book, and a third book isn't planned, and it maybe just speaks to the fact of like, are they going to announce more books even if it's covering different stuff and different content? That'd be the hope that I suppose relatively closely after Shadow of Kyoshi they have some sort of a plan and that it's not just two books. I can't see any reason why they wouldn't want to continue the novels, but I don't know if they have a plan in place. What are your thoughts about like future books and like how quickly they'd want to get around to that?
Yeah, I don't know. They haven't really, spoken to my knowledge that much about it. I think, it's definitely something people in the fandom would want. I haven't seen anyone say no to having, more books or more content or anything like that. So, I'm definitely up for it, but it doesn't seem right now, at least, that they have that in sort of like the immediate plans.
Mm. Yeah, and especially as we get closer and closer to the Netflix series, because like these books are like it's FCE with Michael Dante DiMartino. So if the creators can't be as heavily involved, can we get as big content, or what? And that's going to be one of the things to also look out for, and might explain all these delays with kind of content as well. Um, but yeah, Shadow of Kyoshi is definitely like shaping up pretty well. I think it's going to be a cool experience to going into it this time, sort of having certain expectations, like we know it's going to be good, but it's just about like, okay, we have our first novel out of the way, that the initial hype of first Avatar novel that's in depth is out of the way. Now it's all about how does it like stack up? Does it surpass the first book, or is it maybe not as good? Or that's going to be an interesting one this time, in that it's not going to be all just pure hype train, but there's still going to be a little bit of that. So how do you think that's going to go this time? Of like, it's sort of a more of a known quantity this time, the novel.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. I still feel like there's a lot of hype about it in general. Maybe more from the relationship side of things than the actual, just the book itself. I think that was more the hype for the first one, just because it's not something that we've ever really had to this sort of detail. There have been like other novels and like junior novels and stuff, but I don't think any of them are on the level of what we've seen here, especially not with the maturity that this book has in it. So I don't know. I think it's still going to be pretty hype. I think people are still, the people who are into the books in general from the fandom will still be pretty interested in it, regardless of just, the people who just want to like search for rather, key points in relationships or anything like that.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a lot of excitement about this, and I'm eager to get it again, just to get another massive piece of Avatar content. And we'll see exactly what happens, I suppose, with the Shadow of Kyoshi audiobook, and if that might be available earlier. I don't think Urban Audiobooks has a Shadow of Kyoshi listing, so we'll see what happens when they eventually put one up, if it's on the 21st of July or it's on like October, whatever it was. So that's also going to be another one, because I think there was a lot of hype because it seemed like it was going to be audiobook day one, but now it's not. It's still going to be interesting, especially because I don't know if we've ever mentioned this on the podcast here, but there is, I think Barnes and Nobles have an exclusive version of the Shadow of Kyoshi where it comes with 8 pages of character art.
Yeah.
So that's going to be very interesting to see, because basically the visuals we have are the two covers, and like that's it. But now we're actually going to have other stuff, which I assume will show us Yoon, and I suppose it'll be more focused on second book characters. But it'd be cool if they showed us like Jeonju and like what he looks like and so on. So hopefully some people who get the exclusive version can post those pictures, so we have a visual sense of what the characters look like. But yeah, did you have any thoughts on that? The art extras that they're putting in?
Yeah, I saw that. That's pretty cool. I don't know. Yeah, I just hope people put them up to share them as well.
Yeah, because there's I think an exclusive map, I think, for the first book.
Yeah.
That was cool, but because it was a very limited map, it was basically just sort of Yokoya and the surrounding areas, which is probably the area of the map we know the most about, because it's so clearly covered at like the start of ATLA. We go from Southern Water Tribe, Southern Air Temple, Southern Earth Island, which in this era is still the peninsula, and so on. So that was pretty straightforward, but the art is definitely going to be a big one for sure. So I suppose, do you have any particular points of speculation before we finish up about the Shadow of Kyoshi?
Nah, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where, like, yeah, right now we've only recently really found out what the book is going to properly be about, but the sort of more Fire Nation politics thing. We definitely will have to kind of get into that a little bit more to see what the exact specifics are, but it looks like the Fire Lord at this point in time is going to be a pretty noted character. I suppose that means Kyoshi's dynamic with the Fire Lord is going to be a pretty big one. I also do hope they touch at some point on if she's met the Earth King or not. That could inform some of the sort of peasant uprising stuff from later on. But yeah, we're pretty much just waiting for the release of this book now. And like I said earlier, there are a few other books coming out. Immanent's Library Edition, Promise Omnibus, paperback version of the Rise of Kyoshi, and then the Shadow of Kyoshi. Yeah, unfortunately, it is October until the next new comic, but hopefully it being so far off maybe means we get a relatively early preview of that book to get a better sense for what it will properly be about, but we're still probably waiting a good few months for that. Outside of that, maybe should have mentioned this. I don't know if we mentioned this in the last podcast or not, but the Legend of Korra Funko Pops are beginning to ship out. Some people are starting to get them. We've seen, I suppose, images of both versions of the kind of Korra exclusive, as well as, I think, Mako, Korra, and Asami. Mako, Korra, and Amon. The person who got three of them didn't get Asami in the same order. So, they're coming out, I suppose, over the next kind of month or two. So that's pretty good to see. And then, there's other stuff like Wave 2 of the action figures is coming out. That really cool Diamond Select Aang statue is coming out in a few months. There's stuff happening. It's just kind of waiting around for it. But next podcast will probably be a return to doing our sort of look backs on the comics. I think we're probably going to do Turf Wars this time out. Again, we'll probably wait until the library edition is out, just in case the extras reveal anything about that before we do Imbalance. So probably the next podcast, unless there's big news, will be our kind of re-review for Turf Wars, which is probably a good time to do it with the focus on it with the live readings. But that'll probably be the next podcast. So that's been episode 213 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.